All right, we are live. Hello and welcome to today's web panel discussion, mobile apps and games, internationalization and localization best practices. We have with us Gary Lefman of Cisco, we have Mike McKenna of Zynga, and David Sommer of Net Translators. Gary, why don't you just briefly introduce yourself, and then Mike, and then David, and then let's get started. Gary.
Hello everyone. Firstly, I'd like to thank Chris and David for inviting me onto this panel today, and it's great to be working with Mike again. I am the Internationalization Architect at Cisco. This is my 14th year here, and I work with the Collaboration Technology Group, which develops the widest variety of software products in the company. I'm responsible for evangelizing internationalization, developing strategies and best practices, and I also guide new products through the early stages of internationalization and provide training to engineering teams where necessary.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Gary. Mike?
Hi, I'm Mike McKenna, and I've been doing globalization for at least a couple decades now. Lots of large back-end systems, enterprises, worked at Yahoo for a number of years. And here at Zynga, I am responsible for the internationalization technology that's created by our team that's embedded into the game software. For the mobile devices, we run on both iOS and Android with a number of development environments, having to create and maintain libraries in Objective-C, in iOS, in the Java libraries for Android, as well as the Unity C# libraries used for the Microsoft game development environment.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Mike. David?
My name is David Sommer. I'm the Director of Strategic Operations at Net Translators. I'm about to start my 10th year here. Previously, I held other positions within the company. Of project manager, senior project manager, and I've worked with companies worldwide on different platforms, and thanks a lot for hosting this.
Great. And actually, you don't see my picture on here. My name is Chris Ralph. I used to work in the localization and in the internationalization industry for a long time. Before starting my own company, Boulder SEO Marketing, and now I do SEO, social media marketing, webinars, web panels, and it's a blast doing this stuff, and I'm very excited to be here. Why don't we get started? Let's do a quick poll so we know who we have with us today. And let's see. Okay. If you could let us know if you work on the customer side, vendor side, freelancer, linguist, if you're a consultant, analyst, or other. We'll leave it open maybe another 10-15 seconds. So that'll give us a better idea who our audience is. And then I'll be sharing the results with everybody. So why don't we do, let's give another 5 seconds. If you can cast your poll, please. And 3, 2, 1, I'm going to close the poll right now. I'll be sharing the information right now. So I'm not sure if our panelists can see the results, but 56% customer side, 25% vendor, 6% linguists, 11% consultants or analysts, and 3 others. I'm going to hide the result. Okay, this said, we're going to be discussing 3 topics today. Internationalization best practices, culture, linguistic issues in primary markets, and quality assurance best practices. Let's jump right into the first topic, internationalization best practices. And Mike, I think I'm going to ask you the first question here. What are the top 3 internationalization priorities for your engineers who are developing mobile apps or games? In other words, what are the specific issues that arise with internationalizing for mobile apps or games for that matter? And then maybe we can pass it on to Gary as well. Mike?
All right. I guess you'd say the top 3 things I always press into my engineers is efficiency, usability, and scalability. Efficiency for us has to do with how fast can a copywriter create new content, because a game is composed of three primary items, and that is fiction, or the storyline, the art, or what the colors, the things that move, etc., and the what's called the mechanic, how things move through the game. And for us, things need to be efficient so the copywriter can write as close as possible to plain English and still get content that goes to the developer that is then scalable to be able to meet not just one game, but we get easily at times millions of users accessing a single game at a time across the server. We need to be able to serve the content dynamically to the game with automatically replaceable items. The other aspect has to do with the usability, and usability is both for the copywriter, that they don't shy away from thinking that they're writing code, but they're writing plain English strings. Usability from the developer's point of view, in that the developer is not met with strange constructs, but it seems like normal day-to-day programming, and usability from the linguist or translator's point of view, so that the strings are straightforward and easy for them to translate, yet we're able to handle a wide range of dynamic grammar issues in various target languages under the covers and still make it as easy as possible for all three, copywriter, developer, and the translator.
Great, great. Gary?
Yeah, so at Cisco we don't really deal with games as such, but mostly what I'm going to be talking about is the mobile applications, of which we have a reasonable number. So the problems we face really aren't that much different from what we would experience on desktop applications or web-based applications. So we tend to use very similar tools to solve our problems, such as internationalization, static analysis, and pseudo localization to really work out those problems. But for the mobile devices themselves, we tend to have problems with the variability between the small, medium, and large device form factors. It's usually a very interesting challenge trying to account for all of those, particularly when we're looking at things such as consistent look and feel across all of the platforms for all of the locales. And that's usually something that we have to work out much earlier on in the design phase of development, as opposed to the actual localization side. Although the localization team does get involved with solving some of these problems much earlier on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Actually, why don't we quickly poll our audience about their level of expertise, so you guys know a little bit more, even more about our audience. So if you don't mind, let us know, do you feel you're a beginner, intermediate, or expert in the area of, I would say, internationalization and localization, particularly to games and mobile. So why don't we give it another maybe 10 seconds, but I'm already seeing a trend. It's toward intermediate. Let's give another 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to close this poll right now. I'll be sharing the result. So there we go. We have 90% beginners, 54% intermediate, and 27% experts. So I'm going to hide that poll. All right, with this said, let's jump into the second question. Let me highlight it here. Because there's a wide variety of phone and tablet sizes worldwide these days. How are your products designed to work well on all? Gary, do you want to take the lead on this question?
Yes, of course. Well, Cisco's focus at the moment is on this bring your own device, which is really great choice, but it really does complicate matters somewhat. So Cisco has been focusing on several platforms, and Android and iOS are a couple of those. And we have a dedicated, centralized team that is responsible for the architecture, user interface design, and interaction design, graphics and fonts and so on. And they are responsible for creating a foundation for all of the platform development, regardless of whether it's a desktop application or a mobile device. And we also have a separate dictionary team that is responsible for ensuring that all of the collaboration and communication products terminology is consistent regardless of the platform that the product is running on. So these are a number of the different ways that we have teams making sure that we do have this consistent look and feel across all of our products, which really makes a big difference to localization because we can utilize some of the technologies that we have implemented for various platforms, and also making good use or reuse of the translations that we have put in place already.
Great. Mike, how does Zynga deal with the variety of phone and tablet sizes worldwide?
It's a fun problem. We have what we call SKUs, or the different product targets, and there'll be a different SKU for each destination or platform that you're going on. Let's say you have iOS, but it's iOS iPhone or iOS iPad or iOS mini iPad, and those have got different screen geometries that have to be dealt with. Then we also have the Android for the various Android devices and tablets. The game design teams themselves will develop to those particular targets, and what we do on the localization side is we're currently working with them to move towards a single localization file format. So if they are on iOS, there's something called localizable.strings, which we're encouraging them. We don't require them because we don't own the development teams. We encourage them, or we'll convert them on our own side into our own particular XML format. If they're on the Android side, where they have a particular res file, we'll convert that into our own particular XML format. And if they don't want to cooperate with us because we have a studio model where each studio has the freedom to choose how they do their own development methodology, then our internationalization engineers will then tackle the issues involved to get it into a standardized format to go into our translation tool. The other thing that we do is, from a testing point of view, before a game is allowed to release, we are pretty strict about enforcing that pseudo localization takes place before we start the translation process. And then with that, as we go through the testing, we're able to validate that the screen geometries can either accommodate or need to change to handle the expanded text and the font size issues for readability issues.
Okay,
So
very interesting.
Primary things we go through.
Yeah, David, for on the vendor side, is that how is that? How do you deal with that? How are you challenged?
One second, I was just playing Words with Friends. 1 second. On my Android.
What language?
In English. Which actually goes to what I wanted to say. You know, as a vendor, what we're looking at is, taking that experience from the development language, and typically that's English, obviously, and bringing that across to other locales. So there are a number of challenges which are inherent in being the vendor. The first challenge is simply, bringing some discipline to the development team. Not every company that develops apps, and I would say probably 99% of the companies that are developing apps, and this is not something I've checked, but quite a high percent don't have the luxury of having internationalization gurus on staff. Typically these are companies that are going to be a little bit smaller. So their discipline in their approach to internationalization is going to be really relying upon our expertise. So what we have to do is we have to give them direction. For instance, if they're saying, okay, we'd like this to support iOS and Android, so we're going to be making sure that we get to either the XMLs and the dot strings, and then we have to make sure that there's consistency between them and that there's a discipline on the developer side that if they make a change in one, it'll also be reflected in the other. And obviously, we'll parse those to make sure that that we're consistent between the two platforms. Costs are a real driver for a lot of these companies. So we have to always be on the lookout how we're going to maintain costs reductions so things don't get out of hand for them. A lot of times there's a tremendous lack of commitment on the side of developers to localization. Recently our director of technology blogged about this, and he said that he mentioned a number, I think it was about 1,800 apps that were on the App Store, for the Android App Store. About only about 60, about 3% were localized into French. I think there was some number like that. So there's a tremendous need from these companies to get our direction when they're coming to us. And what we're trying to tell them is, well, understand that you've developed something for an Android, but you do have, that you have screen size limitations, but how much more acute are those screen size limitations when you're talking about text expansion in foreign languages? There are UI layout issues. There's going to be the issue of icons and symbols. There's going to be much more, I believe, at least, cultural sensitivity required when you're developing an app. That goes to what people use apps for, of course.
Yeah.
There's some very good best practices available for iOS, for instance, on the Apple developer site, and then and likewise, obviously, with the Android developer site. The idea of testing becoming a larger part of the localization paradigm really is something that that a traditional developer who may have some localization experience with either web-based or desktop applications, the whole idea of, well, testing is going to become now perhaps 50 to 80% of my costs, whereas before it was about word counts. So that there takes some education in that. I think that the key word is to get our clients to introduce some flexibility when they're developing these apps.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And actually, let me quick take a question from Jenny here that's really relevant to what we just discussed. Do development teams, QA, perform pseudo locale testing before it goes to localization, or does localization perform pseudo locale testing before proceeding with localization? Mike, why don't you take the lead on this question? No. Mike, can you hear us?
Sorry, I had it on mute. I had to cough.
Okay.
For us, pseudo-localization is part of testing. So we have localization testers who will work with the software working with these pseudo-localized languages. And with games, on mobile devices, a game is not usually installed universal to all languages, and that's primarily because of the font size issues and the memory footprint. So we have 4 versions of our pseudo localization test that we run. A European version that will cover pan-Europe plus Turkey, and then a Japanese, Chinese, so 5 actually, Chinese, traditional simplified, and then a Korean. So the pseudo localization test has sample content in each of the target language ranges, and that enables us to test the font loading, screen geometries, etc. Using our localization testers. It's a core group that understands the software a bit more. Then we do the translation and send it out for specific linguistic testing to validate the content in situ, in context, etc.
Great. Gary, do you want to add something?
So I think the dreamy response would be to say, yes, we do pseudo-localization all the time and it's automated, but frankly that's not true. We do try to implement pseudo-localization where we can, particularly with the newer products that are being developed. But as for products that have been around for a while, it's a lot harder to really get into the flow of pseudo-localization. We do have some other techniques that we use, which I'll probably mention a bit later if there's a question related to it. But really, it's something that we do need to make very big improvements on if we are to improve the quality of the internationalized products coming out of the engineering team.
Great. And I think let's take one more question from the audience here, and then we're going to move on to the next topic. With all the different devices and platforms out there, what advice can you give a small company as to how to decide what platforms and devices to support and which ones not? I don't know, David, do you want to talk from the vendor perspective real quick and then hand it over to Mike?
Sure. I think that the first thing that you really have to decide is not what platform, but what region, what locale you're going for. Once you've decided what regions and locales that you're targeting, then those regions have to be researched for which devices are most ubiquitous in those areas. So you might, you might want to make a commitment more to Nexus in one locale rather than to iOS. It really depends on the locale and where your market is.
Great. Mike, do you want to add something?
Well, for me, it's more a matter as I take guidance from the development teams themselves. But what we have seen from the smaller companies that we have acquired is more and more that are building on top of the Unity Microsoft development platform. For our particular needs, it's a little bit harder to localize because it doesn't have some of the libraries that we need. Now it's a little bit easier because we've converted our own internal libraries to go across, but overall it has a solid platform.NET environment that most localization companies are familiar with, and it is consistent in building high-quality output on multiple devices. At least that's what I've seen in the guidance that we're getting from our own development groups. And then from a localization point of view, we just adapt accordingly.
Great. Gary, and you're going to have the last word on this, and you're going to make it snappy because I think we're already behind schedule here. Your take on this.
Okay, that should be easy. The actual form factor or the platforms that we localize is pretty much taken out of our control. It's down to the engineering teams, the marketing teams, what is supported, and then we just localize it to whatever's required.
Perfect. Okay, let's dive into our next topic, culture and linguistic issues in primary markets. And I think, why don't we start off with let me go to my sheet here. I'm going to throw this one at, I think, Gary first. At Cisco or Zynga, what are your product's top 3 global markets? Do you SIM ship? And if not, which markets get your products first? Wow, that's a good one. Gary?
All right, let's see. I believe the current focus is on Brazil, Russia, Russian Federation, India, and China. So that's the BRIC countries. And we do try to simultaneously ship localized products or independent locale installers or language packs where it is architecturally possible. If this isn't possible, then we have to radiate out across other European locales after attending to the French, Italian, German, Spanish based locales, as well as Japanese and at least one flavor of Chinese. So we tend to focus on a small set, and then we move out to radiate across the rest of the European locales as necessary. And we do try to do a fairly good job of looking after the Arabic-based locales as well.
Great. Mike, this is a really interesting question for you. I'd love to hear your answer.
Well, for us, I've explained to other people before that Zynga's primary charter is to bring the world together through games. Zynga actually is a data company, and the games are unique and fun interfaces for creating more data. With that, we have a pretty good idea of where our markets, we get the highest number of users and the highest revenue on a weekly basis. On the mobile side, our biggest markets would be French, German, Spanish, Japanese, simplified Chinese, and then that'd be our top, and then just below that we'd add Italian, Korean, and traditional Chinese. If you throw in multi-platform, we get Portuguese and Turkish that come in the top tier as well, which is interesting. That with the multi-platform, we'll add in we'll see a lot more of the social market, Turkish and Brazil being very high on the social realm. So if we have a game that is maybe not as social, a simple casino game or something like that, we may not add some languages. But then as we move up into the multi-platform, going into Facebook as well as tablets and so on, then we'll add top tier would be French, Italian, German, Spanish, Portuguese, Turkish, and then the next tier below that, if we have to make a decision, is Danish, Dutch, Japanese, Korean, Norwegian, Swedish, simplified Chinese, and traditional Chinese. You'll notice that there's a lot of Scandinavian in that mix, and that's because they are just rabid, I don't know if rabid's the right word, they're enthusiastic game players in both the mobile as well as the web space, and you'll see a lot of overlap between the two. And so we bring them in. It's a very profitable market in that realm.
Wow, interesting. I don't know, David, do you see a trend, like from the vendor side, certain languages that you guys localize into more often?
Yeah, I think that Mike and Gary hit it on the head. I think that apps are going to where the revenue is, rather than having to be localized because of regulatory issues, such as, say, a medical device. You know, a medical device manufacturer is going to go to 28 European languages because, well, they gotta. You know, with the apps, they're going to where the revenue is. And we're talking about the bigger markets, you know, the Japanese market, the Russian market, the German market, you know, the top languages where revenue is going to be found.
Absolutely. And actually, Mike, I have a question for you. How do you guys decide, or like, what's the life cycle, like the revenue life cycle of when you localize a game? Is there a percentage that you want to get out of it? How does that work at a company like Zynga? How do you make your decision?
Well, we have an ROI model that we cover. So there's an overhead component, which is a number of engineers and producers that may be assigned to a game. And then there's a per language component, which is how much are we spending on translation as well as the testing on a per language basis. Because we need to test, not just do the translation, but we also have to do the test beyond proof, but testing in market language. And then we'll look at what the revenue is coming back, and we account for a ramp-up time as the game gains in popularity. And for the game cycle, there is a release, there's a limited release in, let's say, a specific country to test the playability. Then there is a worldwide release to be sure it's getting to all of its markets. And then there's a cross-promo period where we promote the game across our other games to point you at that game. And then about a month after that is when we consider the numbers being good. And then we'll track it starting a month after the cross-promo period and looking at the revenue stream coming in and compare that with the cost of translation and testing afterwards. Then we'll make a decision 1 or 2 months afterwards if we need to pull back on languages, or usually give it at least a quarter or so. And that way we're able to account for markets that may not be doing as well as we would consider it, because it's not cheap being able to have all the translations, et cetera, going and paying for the testing as well as the distribution, servers, et cetera. So we have to be able to track it on a regular basis. We always do sim ship. A game may sneak past us and get as far as a limited release in a single country just to test playability without being translated, but we will not let them go to cross-promo without having it available in all of the agreed-upon languages between the international production team and the game general managers. And we've done studies and found that if we have a cross-promo and it's in English, you have a connected world out there, and people tell their friends and tell other friends, and they get across. Their friends come to the game and they find I can't play it, it's only in English. So for the players that don't speak English, they effectively do not have an interface that they can operate with, and they never come back. So we emphasize that point when we go to the game team to say, you are not allowed to release unless it is a sim ship in all of the target markets that we agree upon. And that agreement is based on metrics we have from previous titles that have a similar genre or makeup, as well as what we know about demographics of the region and what our previous history and revenue has been in the various markets.
Wow. Great. Thanks a lot for that answer. Actually, talking about that, let me ask you another question. Mike, I'll ask you first and then hand it over to Gary. Do you have native speakers of your products doing beta testing of English versions to identify cultural issues that may require addressing?
So for Zynga, we either native speakers or culturally aware individuals that we go through. We have a checklist. We go through to look for particular items of that are of religious significance or cultural significance. We had one military game that designers had come up with, and they had the bad guys with German flags on their shoulders. Probably not a good idea. Got them to change that.
Yeah.
Other that we'll do is we have gone into some Arabic markets, and we worked with the team to remove items related to pork, alcohol, covering skin, etc. And actually we're able to provide a unique experience for Arabic speakers that was different than for other speakers, that took into consideration cultural norms or cultural expectations.
Great. Gary, if you want to answer, you give your answer, and then I have a follow-up question to David. Gary.
Okay. So Cisco's testing organizations span the globe. I don't believe there is a single product that hasn't been or hasn't had its default locale tested by someone who isn't native to the United States of America. With that in mind, we are seeing increased internationalization awareness across Cisco, and we're starting to also see evidence of fewer internationalization defects and higher quality locales as a result of that.
Great. Great, thanks. David, I remember you and we spoke a while back. You told me about a client for whom you had to work on a mobile-based GPS system. Tell me a little bit more about this project. Like, what were some of the biggest challenges when it came to like accents, wording, cultural-based expertise, etc.? And maybe keep it to 2 minutes. Your answer.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll try then. Actually, I think that it's important to understand. You know, this is a very specific app that you're referring to. So, you know, it's important to firstly understand that you have to really take, when you're exposed to so many different opportunities for localization of apps, you have to take a more holistic approach to looking at what they're doing. So, you know, because apps are, as opposed to perhaps, you know, desktop or web-based applications, are a little bit different. You know, web-based, desktop applications are utilitarian. You know, web is voluntary or accidental engagement, but apps have sort of that active engagement from the user side. You know, they either provide a service, provide entertainment, or they're meant to add productivity. You know, on the creator side, their intent is, you know, for revenue, obviously. It could be for ads, it could be a paid app, or it could be packaged as a phone add-in. You know, the classic example is productivity that the email on the mobile device gives you. Or it could be simply branding, you know, hotels, hotel chains, airlines, the mix of them. They all have sort of an app to engage with their clients and for that branding, or even newspapers for that matter. So, you know, if you take a holistic sort of look at this, you have to understand, you know, where they're coming from. So, you know, getting back to the specifics of this app. So this app was developed as a for the providers, for the mobile service providers, to give more engagement to and a value-added service to their customers. So we were localizing this into over time in about a dozen languages, I suppose, and this particular project had some, you know, specifically interesting challenges. Firstly, there's, you know, when it comes to location-based applications, then they have to have a sort of regional sensitivity about multicultural areas. For instance, if you're going to provide this app to to Quebec, so you might want to really investigate not just you know, how something is translated, but perhaps, you know, Saint Laurent could be St. Lawrence for one or for the other. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to translate it, but you have to find the equivalent location because you're giving directions to either an English speaker or to a French speaker. And really, I think the most exciting thing that we did beyond the testing for this particular app was to use this voice synthesizer to really get the accents for each locale down pat. We had to bring in not just native speakers, but native speakers who understand different accents in their locale. And they sat on this voice synthesizer and they tweaked the voice, the synthesized voice, in order to give it the right intonation, whether it was for the UK or for the US, for instance, or whatever other regions that were being localized into.
Great, thanks a lot. I think we'll take maybe one more question on the culture topic. Let me see, how do you manage the storage of already translated strings for future reuse? I've read about a concept called smart string parsing, which helps developers identify repeating strings. Gary, I'm going to ask you first.
I always get picked on, don't I? As far as I'm aware, we don't do this on the software side, but I do believe we do this on the content management system. Or at least the content management system does that for us on the documentation side, when we're looking after things like online help and the user guides, for example. But again, on the software side, we don't, as far as I'm aware, make use of the already translated strings as part of a system when the developers are externalizing strings, for example.
Okay, great. Mike?
We have our own, well, a couple of places. We have our own internal database that we use on the localization team, so that all strings that come in, we keep track of on our side. Each game team has got their own methodology. Some have got CouchDB object-oriented database, some have got flat files, some have got whatever. But for us, it's imperative that we keep track of everything on our own side so that we own the IP, and then when we send it over to the localization tool that the vendors access, that all of the fuzzy matching is done appropriately and can take advantage of previous projects as well. So.
Great, great. I think I'm going to ask David one more question on this topic. How do you address customization of graphics and images that may need localization? And let me add, when I worked for a localization company, we often had companies come, they used flags to indicate the language that was localized. Give us a little bit more information about how do you guys as the vendor deal with the customization of graphics, images, flags, etc.?
Well, I think that the issue of flags is a lot less common when we're talking about mobile. You know, flags are, you know, you go into a website, you grab a flag there, and that'll give you, you know, your region, / language, whatever. With apps, you sort of, you know, there are the settings that you can determine, you know, the language settings. So that's much less a problem. In terms of the images, well, you know, I think that a story actually serves to demonstrate one of the most interesting parts of mobile apps. You know, as I mentioned earlier, you know, you have to keep it short and simple with mobile. You don't have a lot of space on that little tiny screen, and I keep saying, well, I have to get a bigger screen because as I get older, the fonts seem to shrink and I can't read them anymore. So you know, you have to engage your users. So there was an interesting project that we worked on, which was a completely icon-based and symbol-based application. And essentially what this company was doing was they were asking us to localize icons. And each icon was intended to convey a different message. So what we had to do was, rather than take our so-called translators, we had to take typical users of that demographic in the region and say to them, okay, this is what this product is intended for. Let's now investigate for your demographic in your region with your cultural sensitivity how it's going to work and what the graphics that should be used are. And we came up with some very interesting experiences. For instance, we had to suggest in certain regions that for instance, more conservative regions, that the customer actually chuck some of the graphics because they were not appropriate for the conservative sensibilities in that region. So we even had one of our resources blush, sort of. If you could blush in email, when trying to explain why it was not appropriate. Essentially, it's trying to explain to your parents, what WTF means. That was the sort of the experience that we were faced with. Great. So what we try to do is we try to take a tip more than just a translator, but get into the head of the typical user when it comes to the cultural sensitivity for graphics and icons and so on.
Great, thanks a lot. All right, we're going to move on to the next topic, last topic today, quality assurance best practices. And actually I'm going to ask Gary and Mike, if any, what kind of tools do you use in the process? Mike, why don't you, Mike, or Gary, go ahead, you first.
Okay.
That's the same, we use fairy dust. No, seriously, we use internationalization static analysis tools, particularly Globalizer, which is a brilliant tool. And our vendors create their own bespoke tools that are used for the automation of screen captures and the verification of externalized strings and so on. So on one hand, we handle static analysis on the engineering side, and then on the vendor, the localization and linguistic testing side is being handled by our vendor using their bespoke tools.
Great. Mike?
On our side, we also use a Globalizer, it's a static analysis tool, but it only helps us for doing the analysis of the back-end PHP action script, the actual code, Objective-C, as well as the Java code. It won't help us in finding embedded strings in visuals, but at least will help to identify where all the visuals are so we can look at them. One of the advantages to using it, we'll use it usually at the early stages when, let's say, we've acquired a small game company and they've never done internationalization before. We'll go in and do an analysis of their mobile code to see where various embedded strings might be occurring. The other helpful tool that we have on the testing part is we're able to set up internal servers that we can then release the mobile apps to the testers so that they can get access to them, and then provide mechanisms so that they can be able to play the game and get farther along than a normal user would be, so we can test all the various screens.
Great. And I have to say, Globalize, it's by Lingaport. It's actually also a Boulder-based company. Thanks, guys. Let me see. Let's move on. How does a QA test plan? And I would like to invite our attendees to submit their questions. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end of the session to address those questions. So feel free to ping us questions. How does a QA test plan for a mobile app or game differ from a test plan for a large software program? Tell us a bit about the app and game specific items that your QA techs focus on. If your game, we'd love to know what breaks the most. All right, when we start with games, Mike, I'll let you go first.
That was a long question.
Yeah. Difference between test plans.
Yeah, different. So the test plans. So I don't work as closely with the test team themselves, although they're in all of the same key meetings. But the main aspect that they have is our testers are expected to walk through the same user experience that the end user walks through, and be able to access the screens that the end user would encounter. So the main difference that occurs is that for new content that may appear on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, that the tester's game plan is to A, do a smoke test to validate that the same, what we call FTUI, the first time user experience, is still intact, that they're able to get through the main segments of the code and then thoroughly test wherever the new content is, and that they can get to that, access it, validate it, and pull out again. We rely a lot on the core development team doing the major part of the functionality testing, and then use that as a model for rolling on for the test plans that will go to the in-language testers. since there's a limited number of testers depending on the game, if it's lower down on the list, the game in terms of revenue, and we don't have quite as many QA, then the QA may alternate different languages on different days. So let's say there's 7 languages, they might do the top 3 on day 1 for new content, and then the next 4 on day 2, testing the new content plus the next day's content. And flip-flop like that, so you aren't using 100% of the testers 100% of the time.
Great, great. Gary, what's your take on this question?
Yeah, test plans tend to be shorter and the testing is usually faster. It's very specific to the function of the application rather than any integration beyond the application. Whatever goes on in the cloud, whatever happens on the server side, we tend to not focus on that. It's more about what's going on in front of the user and that user's experience. But the usual problems we do encounter, we tend to have little control over, particularly when it's on the platform side, the platform's fonts, the text input systems, and I think that's all I can think of at the moment. But the fonts and the text input systems tend to be something we don't have much control over, and that is one of the biggest problems that we usually encounter.
Hello?
I think.
I think we've lost Chris.
Did we lose Chris?
Okay.
Oh no, our leader has left us. Well,
Can you hear me?
Welcome to GoToWebinar, web events made easy.
with how platforms change, it's just you can't really predict whether the next version is going to be backwards compatible, and so often it's not backwards compatible, especially on iOS. So we're always chasing after the next version in order to either provide actual devices or simulators for the testing environment.
Hey, can you guys hear me again?
Yeah, we went ahead without you.
All right, good for you. Cool. Sorry about that. My headset. Hey, David, I got a question for you. Can you share how a localization vendor such as NetTranslators manages the process of QAing apps or games on different devices and versions?
Yeah, actually, while you were off, I mentioned that one of the biggest challenges was the speed with which versions are changing and devices are coming on. Cool. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we have. The other challenge, and I mentioned this earlier, is trying to get the education into the importance of localization testing. We all from the traditional localization groups understand the importance of testing and validating what you've done. But in applications and mobile devices, the testing becomes really the most important part of what you're doing, because that's going to be your user engagement. And that goes to what I said earlier as well, that apps are active engagement. There's nothing there's nothing accidental about words with friends. You're going to be sitting there. There's nothing accidental about sitting in an airport and waiting for your flight and looking at the news that's going on. There's nothing accidental about it. So the engagement is so much more active, and the quality has to be so much better. And the only way to ensure that is by having a comprehensive testing approach to what you're doing.
Great. Thanks so much. And I think that actually answered Keith's question. Question from Leona. Have you ever experienced that a game failed in a certain locale due to bad translation quality? I guess, Mike, question for you.
Oh, never. No. A game, well, there's two game fails. One is a syntax problem. And we ran into that a number of times early on, primarily in our Facebook games and occasionally with the mobile games. And we have built incredibly sensitive filters to look for syntax errors. So we are almost doing a recompile of the game strings before they even get to the game team to do the compilation. Making sure that we have argument matches. If there's 5 arguments on the English side, there better be 5 arguments on the translated side. And there are occasions when we found the translation may require like fewer number of arguments. We validate with the team and that's okay. Anyway, we do syntax checking. The second game fail is we can't detect it from the engineering side, but that is from the QA side and hopefully never the customer side, and that is where the translation is incorrect, so a user is not getting the information that they need. For instance, in a card battle game, and you have your card gives you power over so many other cards or whatever. If it's translated wrong, the player doesn't know how they can actually win a battle when they're playing against other players. And that's where a translation can go very much wrong and get players upset because they go, I can't win the game because my translation is wrong.
Absolutely. I want to take this question from Corny for Gary. Gary, if you had a crystal ball, what are some of the new challenges you foresee for the near future with regard to mobile app localization?
Oh, crystal ball.
Are there
I
any?
knew I'd be a very rich person. Let's see. I think the biggest challenge for the future would be the possible introduction of an entirely new platform which could disrupt the iOS market and the Android market. It's new challenges, but you know, at the end of the day, internationalization problems are internationalization problems. It doesn't matter what platform really an application is running on. So I think the introduction of a new mobile platform would be the biggest disruptor for us.
Okay, great. And actually, we're nearing the top of the hour here, but let me ask David this question, which I've had experienced myself when I worked in the industry. How do you handle the space limitation issue, especially when it comes, you know, a language like German, where there's like a 30% plus text expansion? David, how do you deal with that?
Oh, that's a good question. Next question.
No. From my personal experience, man, you have to be really creative when translating the content. You have to like abbreviate it. It's a hassle. Actually, why don't we, Mike?
I think I actually will answer that.
Yeah.
I think one of the most important things is is to make sure that firstly, we all spoke about this pseudo localization. That'll help us identify early on, what specific challenges you'll have within that specific device or game. So, putting that on the side. The other thing is that you have to go back. Often you'll have to go back to the source and say, what can I do different in the source in order to make sure that the experience of the German speaker is not going to be one of, oh my God, I'm playing an English game or an American game in German. So you sort of have to look for that sort of resolution to the issue.
Absolutely. Maybe Gary, what's your take? Are you dealing with that issue as well?
Yes, we are. I'm part of this thing called the Collaboration Dictionary Board at Cisco, and we developed or define the terminology that's going to be used across all of the collaboration products. And when a new term is defined or put in place into the dictionary, we are starting to create alternative versions of those terms for the mobile devices, particularly for our IP phones, which are effectively the same sort of form factor, they're very small displays. So we're having the full-size original terminology, and then we're creating smaller strings or smaller terms, smaller words for the mobile devices. And this is all done up front, and it's all localized and verified. So we do have a system in place, but it only applies to the most commonly used terms.
Great. Mike, actually, you have, that's the last word for these questions.
4 characters or less, plan on 300% increase. 10 characters or less, plan on 200% increase. Anything more, expect 50% increase. That's what we tell the designers, that's what we tell the engineers, and then we break it later with pseudo localization.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. We have not addressed many questions, so my apologies for that. Maybe we can do a part 2 at some point, maybe next year. Mike, I think you told me you may be at Loc-World. Gary, you may be too. I know David will be at Loc-World this coming October, I think 9 through 12. Actually, I'm going to be there too. So hopefully we can have a drink or some food together. If any of the attendees would like to meet up with David, have a chat with the vendor, maybe reach out to Gary and Mike, I encourage you to do that. Let me see what else. We haven't set our next date for the next web panel or webinar yet, but stay tuned. We'll let you know. Any last words, David?
Well, I just want to thank you again for playing the MC here, and looking forward to meeting all my friends and colleagues at Loc-World.
Great. Gary, last word.
I don't really have one, apart from buy shares in fairy dust.
Great. Mike?
I'm looking forward to augmented reality games using Google Glass.
All right. Maybe that's the topic of our next web panel next time. Gary, Mike, David, I'd like to thank you for sharing your expertise. I had a blast. I would like to thank our attendees. We had nearly close to 200 people register for this event. The recording will be available shortly. This said, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you very soon again. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.